Today's daf is daf Dalid, and we'll start with Ella on the top line. The Gemara was trying to justify why we need a pasuk, a special limud, to establish that a Nazir is not allowed to drink yayin shel mitzvah. Ella ki hadi amarava, what would be the case where you want to know whether the Nazirus is chal to prohibit yain? Shvua she'eshte, he has a mitzvah to fulfill his shvua, which he took to drink yain. So that becomes yain shel mitzvah. Because we already know, so now he's makabel Nazirus, and there's a head-on collision between the Easter yain to a Nazir, subsequent to his kabbalas Nazirus, and the mitzvah to fulfill his shvua, the asiyah Nazirus v'chaylal shvua. And the Nazirus is chal on the shvua, and he becomes prohibited to drink the wine. And that's when Reb Shimon said that you need a pasuk to teach you that if he accepts upon himself Nazirus, he's prohibited from yain, even though he has a mitzvah to drink the yain. And if not for this pasuk, you would have said that the Nazirus would now not be chal because he has a mitzvah to drink the yayin. And we would say the following, that if Nazirus is an Isser Gavra, as we discussed yesterday, then that Isser Gavra can't be chal on a mitzvah Gavra, just like Einish Boin ala mitzvahs. Kamash Malon, that the Nazirus is chal and he's enjoined from drinking wine, even though he took a shvur to drink wine. Interesting would be to think whether or not maybe this only applies in a kind of violation of his shvur b'shei v'alkaseh, by abstaining from drinking, but to violate shvur b'kum vaseh, that's a whole different story. The Gemara raised the following objection: Rabbana nami hom boile lesar yayin mitzvah ki yayin mishus. The Chachamim would have to logically find the source from which they can derive that a Nazir is also even in yayin shel mitzvah, like in the case that we gave before of shvur she'eshter. How are they going to derive that conclusion? And the Gemara says in Cain, if the pasuk is only teaching me an Isa Yain to mitzvah lemakra mi yain. So basically, what the Rabbanan are arguing is that you can derive two things from one pasuk. My v'sheichar, it says both mi yain v'sheichar. Why did the Torah have to add v'sheichar? V'sheichar, mashmamet minot tarti. We're going to derive two halachas from the word yain. We're going to derive that the Nazir is also even the yain shel mitzvah, like the case of shvur shesh the yain. From sheikha, we're going to derive the conclusion that if a person accepts upon himself Nazirus, even for one Easter, it's chal as a totality, and he's chal of Nazirus Gemura and all the Duke Nazirus. So the Gemara now asks, Rabbi Shimon, what does Rabbi Shimon do with the word sheichar? From the word yayin, he derives the conclusion that a Nazir is prohibited even after he took a shvur. Shesh the yayin, and there's yayin shel mitzvah. But why did the Torah have to add, in addition to the word yayin, the word sheichar? Hainu time is because of sheichar la lufe. This is to teach us a sheichar lemigdash. And there is shava to teach me what kinds of liquids or beverages are included under the Easter. So now we're going to have a comparison between Nazir and a Kohen who goes into the Mikdash to do the Avodah, the Ksiv, with regard to the prohibition imposed upon Aaron and his children that they could not go into the Mikdash to do the Avodah when there's Shesuya Yayin in Vayikra Yud. It says, "V'yayin v'sheichar al peish ata uvanecha itach," and the word sheichar is written with regard to Nazir to teach us that any mashke, which is meshaker, that's lashon sheichar, it is intoxicating beverage, which is prohibited in the case of a Nazir, is likewise prohibited in the case of a Kohen, as far as Shesuya Yayin to enter into the Mikdash. Ma legabi Nazir Yayin hu delitza. However, let's go back to the case of Nazir. is it true that a Nazir is enjoined from drinking shechar, which is meshaker, if it's not yayin? And the answer is no. So the shar mashkin lo, a Nazir is enjoined from drinking wine, but not from shar mashkin, which is very interesting when you think about it, because what brought the Nazir to the Makabal Nazir is he saw Sota B'Kilkula. I would assume that Sota B'Kilkula would include all mashkim mashakrim, what they call in idiomatic English booze, all yash, all yayin mashakir should be included. But the Torah says yayin, and shar mashkim lo is af. Therefore, we derive the conclusion that in the case of a kohen is enjoyed as a yayin to enter into the avodah of the mikdash, nami yayin udelitzar aval shar mashkim mishtakrim lo. He would be permitted to go into the mikdash to do the avodah, even if he drank intoxicating beverages. And this is Rabbi Shimon's drasha. But Lafukim and Rabbi Yehuda, and this is in contrast, dissenting the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, decided Rabbi Yehuda Omer, anything that's meshaker is included on the Suyayin and enjoins the coin from doing the avodah. Tvela ki'ilis. Tvela is mashed up te'enim, figs that come from a place called ki'ilah, and they have a certain intoxicating ingredient to them. And this place called ki'ilah appears in Shmuel Aleph in Perikaf Gimel, or shasa dvash v'cholav. He drank honey or milk, and these are meshakir like wine. And the nifnas of Migdash Chayav, he gets malchus for yayin v'sheichar al peish. So that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Chachamim, they don't derive the Gzeir Shav of Sheichar and Migdash, but Sheichar is going to be the basis from which we derive that a person who accepts upon himself Naziris for one Iser, then the Naziris is Chal on all these Surim. They hold like Rabbi Yehuda that even if he drinks Shar Mashkin, he would be Chayav, because they don't have this Gzeir Shav to derive the Easter Kahuna of Shesuyayin from Nazir. Iboy Seima. The Gemara now offers an alternative interpretation of Rav Shimon, that from the word Yayin we do derive that a Nazir is also even the Yayin Shel Mitzvah, but the word Sheichar is not coming to teach me that a Davar Meshaker is not included in the Easter Shesuyayin of Kohanim. Rav Shimon Lesle Easter Chal Easter. Rav Shimon holds ein Easter Chal Easter. So that which is also, for example, the Vela would not become also on Yom Kippur with an additional Easter. The Sanya of Shimon Omer Ha'ochel Nevela Yom Kippurim Patur. He does not violate the Easter Achil of Yom Kippurim, because Yom Kippurim cannot be Chal on the pre-existing Easter Nevela. So he will get Malchus for eating Nevela on Yom Kippur, one set of Malchus for Nevela, but he would not have incurred an additional set of Malchus, even if he got Asra for Yom Kippurim. And it would be possible to say that the same logic applies to the case of Nishba, where he takes a Shvur Shalo Lishtos Yain, and then he was Makabal of Naziris, and then he went ahead and he violated and he drank. We would not be Machayev him a set of Malchus because of violating Naziris, because it's already included under the Shvur of Shalo Lishtos Yain. Is therefore the Torah to add the word Sheichar to tell me that the Easter Naziris is in fact Chal on the Easter Shvur. It gets Malchus for both these Surim, and that's a special Chiddush here in this case of Naziris al Gabi Shvur, based on the extra word Sheichar. Mara asks, Ula Rabbanon, according to the opinion of the Rabbanon, that if a person's Makabal Naziris for Davar Echad, he becomes a Nazir for all the dinim, all the Kukei Naziris. Is Nami, we have to ask the question about Ksiv Mikol, Rabbi Shimon built his case on the word mikol, asher yasan gefen yain, including the entire gamut and enterprise of Nazirus, and less than that would not be considered Kabbalah's Nazirus. Amri loch Rabbana, the Rabbana would answer, Hosam limed al Yisrei Nazir shemitztar from mikol, tells me that all the various Isurim that are included on the Yayin can be mitzvah for the shir kizayis to generate malchus. For example, let's say he ate chatzi zayis zogim and chatzi zayis chartzanim. They're mitzvah together, and he's chayiv malchus as if he ate a full kizayis. Rav Shimon, who derives from here that Nazirus is chal only if he accepts all the Yisurim, he call Leslie Tziruf. He does not need a pasuk for tziruf because he holds Yechai Malchus even for less than a kizayis. The Sanya, as we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol Shula Malchus, Velomer Kizayis Alinyan Karba. Any dvarim asurim are asur b'malchus, even b'kol shul. And the requirement of kizayis as a minimum shear is only in a case of somebody who eats b'shogeg that which is would generate b'mezid a chiyuv kares, and therefore b'shogeg generates a chiyuv chatos, and he's not chayav a korban chatos until he eats a kizayis. But if b'mezid he eats even less than a kizayis, then he gets malchus, because the halacha l'Moshe Sinai was to get malchus for a kosher. With regard to Nazir, his korban is not coming because he violates an Isra Achila, but rather it's part of the Nazirus. The termination of Nazirus, Hashlomas and Nazirus, requires a korban. And therefore, with regard to that din, it's not shaykh to derive halach of Tziruv, and therefore the pasuk Mikol, Asher Yoseh, remains a superfluous pasuk from which we can derive that a Nazir is not a Nazir unless he's makabel on himself the entire gamut and all the dimensions of Nazirus. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Daf, well, actually the middle of Daf, Daled Omanal. Hareini kishimshon ukeben manoach ukebal dulila. When is there a valid Kabbalas Nazirus, Lashonos Kabbalas Nazirus? And here we're talking about Nazir Shimshon. He's got to be very specific. He can't just say Areni Kishimshon. He can't even say Areni Kishimshon ben Manoach. He's got to add something. What does he add? So the Mishnah gives three options. One option is Kibal Delila. Now we know that certainly it was Makabal Nazirus. Or alternatively, he adds to Shimshon ben Noach Kivisha Okar Dalsos Aza. Or alternatively, number three, Kimisha Nikru Plishtim es Eno. They gouged out the eyes of Shimshon. It's a reason Nazir Shimshon. So Gemara says, Lomali Remisne Kol Halin. What's the problem? Let him just say Areni Kishimshon. Tzricha. The Iyama Areni Kishimshon, if all he said were those two words, Hamamina, we have the right to assume that Shimshon Achrina. He doesn't have in mind Shimshon ben Manoach. He has in mind someone else, Shimshon. He did not have in mind to be makabel on himself. Nazirus Shimshon. Kamashmalon, now he adds ben Noach. So he certainly has in mind Shimshon. No. Even that's not clear as a loshon of Kabbalas Nazirus. The Tonic ben Noach, even if he said Areni Kishimshon ben Manoach, Havamina, Ika, the Miskei Hoch, there may be someone who has that name. It makes sense that if a person's name is Manoach, he might name his son Shimshon, and his name now, the son's name is Shimshon ben Manoach, and that's what he had in mind. Kamashmal, and therefore the Tana says he has to add one of the next three phrases in order to clinch his Kabbalas Nazirus, either Kibal Delila, or Kimisha Nikru Plishtim Esainov, or Kimisha Akar Dalsos Azo. Only when he adds those two, his Kabbalah of Kishimshon ben Manoach, then we know that he means the Kabbalah Nazirus of Shimshon. And this leads us to the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Dalet. Ma bein Nazir Olam with Nazir Shimshon. In both cases of Nazir Olam and Nazir Shimshon, the Nazirus lasts throughout his life, And what's the difference between the two? And the Mishnah explains that there's a kula that applies to Nazir Olam, which does not apply to Nazir Shimshon. Nazir Olam hichbid siaro meka v'tar. If the hair on his head becomes very heavy, then he can cut off his hair. He can't cut off all his hair, but at least he can cut off enough hair that it's not weighing down heavily on his head. Who maybe shalosh behemos. He has to bring a keves liola, kiv salachatos, and ayol shlomim. These are the karbanos that a Nazir Tar brings when he completes his Nazir. So for Nazir Olam, periodically, so to speak, he completes his Nazirs, and he has to bring the 3 behemos. Bim nitma, maybe carbon tuma. He has to bring the classic carbon tuma of a Nazir Tar who became Talmud. Shtei Torim, Shnei Bnei Yonah, one for Chatas, one for Olena, Kevis ben Shnosal Yosh. Nazir Shimshon, he can never ever cut his hair. However, there is a kula in Nazir Shimshon that if he contracts Tumah, it may be carbon Tumah. He does not bring a carbon Tumah. The Gemara is going to explain based on Rabbi Yehuda that he's allowed to be the Tamil Lameis. The Gemara asks Nazir Olam Adikar Shmei. You never even mentioned a Kabbalah's Nazir Olam. What is a Nazir Olam? And Chisuri Metzor Chitoni, you have to add the following words in the Mishnah: Omer Hareini Nazir Olam, Hareze Nazir Olam. So there's a Kabbalah's Nazir's Olam. Mabe Nazir Olam Nazir Shimshon, Nazir Olam Hifbid Se'aro, make of Vitar, or maybe Shal famous, in it maybe called Tuma, and Nazir Shimshon Hifbid Se'aro, Eino, Mekil, Vitar, and then on the top of Daf Dalet Amud Beis, the Eno Mevi Korban Tuma.